Alright, so here I am at the end game of Star Ocean 6, The Divine Force, 83.1 hours in. I beat the extra content, I beat the extra hard boss, I even beat them at their little mini game. It's not a card game, but, you know, I'm going to call it a card game because usually that's what it is in these JRPGs. So I've done everything that I really wanted to do, and I gotta say, it started to become a slog. And it didn't start to become a slog just at the end as I was doing the arduous, like, okay, let's squeeze a few more hours out of this RPG, guys, by putting in some crazy bosses. No, it wasn't at that point. It was before that. And I'm sad to say that because I really wanted to like this game. My initial impression probably showcases that quite a bit. Where I was saying, you know, I was thinking it was about like a 7 to 8 maybe. And the more I played, the more that score kind of wobbled around. And I think the big reason for that is it just got tiresome. It just got, you know, it started to lose me. Now, I want to demonstrate what I think is the big problem here. A lot of your best combos, you can't do with low charges, right? And it's really easy to lose those. And you need AP, you need to build up AP by doing certain mechanics in the fight. And it's not hard to do that, but just getting hit and losing them is just a huge pain. There's abilities that mitigate that, but overall, I'm going to put that as a major a major pain point. It just hurts your enjoyment of the game. It interrupts the flow, it doesn't feel great, and it just feels frustrating. Especially when a lot of characters rely on generating quite a bit of it. So it can be terribly frustrating to know you have everything set up and then you just happen to get caught by a few hits of some stupid attack. And it shouldn't be a big deal, but it is. Now, that said, I did find some really interesting ways to play. For example, my healer character here has some pretty powerful setups you can do. I did have fun messing around with this. So for the people who like RPG elements and, you know, tinkering with skills, one thing that was kind of fun with her is putting on abilities which have proc chances of like lightning, which my head kind of is in the way of right now. But, you know, for example, this piece, I have a 20% chance of doing fire projectiles when I'm casting a spell, 10% chance of doing firing lightning projectiles when I'm just doing a normal attack. And then again, I just stacked a bunch of those kinds of effects on, so that whenever she groups people up, because she can pull everyone together and puts out a heal or puts out some buffs, it has a chance of shooting out lightning damage and fire damage or ice damage. And overall, that means that she can actually do some decent output, even as a healer. Of course, it's a little bit awkward to play as her, compared to how the game wants you to play normally, but I actually found her to be a very useful character, and a pretty strong healer once you build her right. She kept everyone up, topped up, even in the highest difficulties. The only thing that really became an issue was one-shot mechanics. Leticia here was my kind of big damage dealer. There's some pretty easy combos to set up. Elena is pretty good. I think she's got like a good bit of versatility. She has some really heavy hitting attacks, but overall, her combos just didn't flow as well together as I would like constantly. Raymond too, like he's a big heavy hitter, but there's characters that I preferred over him. They were okay, but definitely not the best. I'll talk about all the characters though in a second. Let me just give you my basic score. So overall, my end score is at a 5 or a 6. It's acceptable. It's playable. It gets you some smiles. You know, you'll be happy. You'll see some fun interactions. The characters aren't, you know, just horrible. You're not going to groan and roll your eyes. But I do feel like a lot of things ended up disjointed. A lot of the quality just kind of fell off. There's some good ideas here. There's some things that look decent. But overall, I don't think it ties together in a neat bow. I think it just ends up kind of messy. Things kind of spill all over you. And you're left feeling, you know, somewhat satisfied, but like it could have been a better game and like your time could be better used elsewhere. And this is from me trying to like the game a lot and giving it a lot of, you know, chances, so to speak. I'm being more than fair, I think, about that. I think if you're looking for like a really enjoyable RPG and you don't have a lot of time, this might not be for you. But if you really love Star Ocean, if you really like, you know, sci-fi fantasy things, if you're just itching for any RPG to play and you like a little bit of, you know, pseudo action combat, this is decent. You know, you could do worse. So I think it's like a 5 or a 6. leaning a little more towards 6 because there are moments of quality, but I don't know. I just feel it's very painfully average overall. It drops the ball in a lot of things, which I'll get into more in a second. So let's talk about what's good. So what's good about this game? Well, I do think the combat has, even though I complained about it like earlier there, it has a lot of potential. There are fun things about it. There is, cool things to implement. There are fun characters to mess with that have good ideas. It's just they're not always executed as well as they could be. For example, we have our big caster here. This buff old man. Spells can be very powerful. You can see they stay there for a while. You can cut down the spell length pretty quickly, even on long casts. And you can certainly do a lot of damage. Where I have a problem, though, is that it doesn't always play well together. Right now it's working because the enemies aren't just swarming me. But when you get into boss fights and things are just thwacking you and focusing on you because you're the player-controlled character, it can be frustrating to control these characters. And you don't want to be micromanaging, your casters and trying to swap to them and cast the right spell, because they should really be doing that on their own. But sometimes they'll just do stupid things, like they'll stand in place. So actually playing some of these characters can be alright. I won't say that playing as Midas is the most fun, because there's a lot of standing around. I mean, I've got his cast time down low with numerous abilities, so, that makes it a little bit more functional for a character like him. But, I can't control him while controlling other people that need it too. And I found that was the biggest problem with the combat is, when you have to take the reins, you can't take the reins enough, like let's say in Final Fantasy VII, the remake, where, you're supposed to kind of queue up a lot of actions with different characters in a sort of way, and it kind of functions. In this, I feel like they kind of dropped the ball on that. It doesn't work quite so well. And when left to their own devices, your characters are just kind of, they'll sometimes do something useful, but they never can really put together the build you gave them. And I think that ends up being a weak point, because for some of them, like my healer, I kind of have to control her for her to really get the benefit of how I've set her up. Leticia, my big damage dealer, she's usually okay to be left on her own, but you want to be able to control your big damage dealer sometimes, so it could be a little annoying. And I also like the way she plays the best, but ironically, I get to play her the least. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where I'm giving this as a positive. I do think the combat has a cool setup. It looks flashy enough. It has some mechanics, so it's okay. But, it's a good idea. It looks good. It is fun overall. Like, I enjoyed the combat. It's just there were some little things that really reared their head, especially on the hardest difficulty with the challenge bosses. Otherwise, I mostly was able to put my head down and get through it. So, I'm leaving that as a good point, because I don't want to be, a jerk about this. I try to like the games I play. I don't really want to be one of those, like, oh, everything sucks kinds of people. But okay. Another good thing, the start of the adventure was immaculate. I felt like, I was getting into a classic RPG, and I like that feeling. I know people want, like, new things, novel experiences, but sometimes it's nice to just feel like a classic RPG start, and this had that. The characters were good enough, their interactions were fun, things were building up at a steady pace, but then, you kind of hit the ground running, and then you start going too fast, and you're like on a treadmill, and you just kind of face plant, and your face drags against the the bottom of the treadmill, and it just kind of skins your nose. I think that's kind of what started to happen. But there was a lot of, potential at the beginning, and I was really getting kind of into all the characters. They were pretty fun. The cast variety is also pretty great. Like, if you look right here, you get old man Midas, who I adore this guy, just big muscle mage. Yeah, that's cool. And he's fun. He's an ordinary old man, and I appreciate that. We don't need to have every character be some hot anime girl. Our healer, she's dressed very oddly, but she's fine. I kind of like her personality's just a little stereotyped, like just really energetic, what you'd expect. Decent though, wants to heal people, fine. The princess, I think I mentioned her in my intro video, but she's got a good personality, very strict with herself, very prim and proper, very tropey, but it works. You get a captain from another ship who's trying to, rekindle her family's name and make it important and not related to something bad. And, she's okay, but she doesn't really get a lot of time to do much. She can look a little bit weird compared to the other characters, like, especially with that gigantic coat. but she actually plays really well. Her combat is surprisingly strong. She's got a nice mechanic where you do more damage when you're closer to enemies, and you can do some pretty crazy things with her. So I tended to have her in my party when I could. This is a character you only get on Leticia's route, her cousin, who's striking that very boy toy pose right there. He's got a halberd. He fights pretty cool. He has like a lot of, he's fun, but I kind of feel like when you already have Raymond, it's kind of hard to want someone else who does a very similar thing with the damage. Maybe he's got stuff that I don't quite understand, but I wasn't overly impressed. But he's cool enough. Albert here is really good for gathering up enemies. I didn't use him that much, but he's got his points, and he's a decent character, but he kind of falls off after about midway. He stops really doing as much. Because, of course, the fantasy, medieval style characters all kind of fall by the wayside. Like, they kind of just, Midas, for example, he's like, oh, technology is really cool up here. Yep, that sure is some technology I don't understand. They kind of get into that phase where they're just kind of commenting on how blown away they are by modern things, and I'm sure everyone can kind of put two and two together with that and figure out what I mean. I don't want to waste your time talking about it in the stream, but in essence, all the characters that are more medieval flavored, except for Leticia, are mostly just along for the ride after that. So it kind of feels like the game sort of splits, even though Raymond got a good amount in while in the fantasy land. So I did feel like a little bit saddened by that. I think they didn't make use of this wide cast. And then Elena, she's pretty enjoyable. The android, she's got a good mix of attacks, so she's always fun. And Malkia, great design. Looks a little bit awkward from the back when you're playing as her, though, so her frontal picture here looks a lot cooler. When she's moving around, I feel like she's a little stilted. Her gameplay, I never really enjoyed it a lot. There's like this HP trade-off mechanic where you can sacrifice your health to cast a spell faster. But you don't have good enough spells to really warrant that. I'd rather just slot in Midas, or if I'm looking for damage, just use Marielle. She has some uses, like she does have like this nice attack which makes you invincible for the duration of it. But overall, I don't know, I never jived with playing as her. She was okay as a character in the back, but kind of a shame. And Raymond just has a ton of damage and this like orbital laser thing, which is crazy but really good to have. So overall, the cast variety is good. We get enough of that. Crafting, very useful. You can make some really powerful things, and I do like this system. It seems a lot more complicated than it is with all these options. Basically, you can make a strong weapon by smithing and then use synthesis to get the effects you want on it. So you can kind of craft your ideal weapon, or at least a decent one. Mine here wasn't so great. I have like a damaged insects boost. But sometimes, you got to work with what you got. But, like this one, you get surprise attack, minus 12% damage taken while you're on the ground, a higher drop chance thing. You can build an experience set. On accessories, you can decide, okay, I want to absorb health, I want to deal more stagger damage, I want to have a chance of not using AP while casting spells or skills, which is very useful. So that's pretty cool. The JRPG card game requirement thing, when you do that, it's called a SOA in this. You earn pieces which can be equipped as accessories, and those tend to be pretty good at giving you some powerful skills. For example, like this one right here, this is an accessory. Let me scroll down to it because it's not going to show it right away. And this one has a 20% chance of activating skills without consuming AP, which was good on Midas, but more importantly, what I have on this emblem is I stole another piece which gave me less casting time. So you can do certain things that really come together well, and you can put them on other accessories. I might not be explaining it the best right now in this quick review, but basically you can take the best properties of different pieces and put them on something else. It's nice. You can also make equipment way sooner than you'll be able to buy it, which is helpful when you're in the harder difficulty. So overall, it feels pretty satisfying. It's not overly complex, so you won't be grinding your nails off and just frying your brain trying to put it together. The middling is the story is just okay. It has, a beginning, a middle, and an end, so at least it has that. It doesn't leave you waiting at the end. But it's just not great. It starts off with potential, but it just rushes. And I think that's the big problem. It takes its time with the first few plot points, but then it's just a mad dash. You're flying through bosses, you're flying through enemies, you're flying through very typical, like, oh, it turns out I'm not the evil last boss. It was actually this other guy all along. But they're all really poorly done. Like, they bring this one guy in who you've never really interacted with in person before, and he's like, I'm the big bad. And you know he's not the big bad because you're not even, you're not that high level yet. And then the guy you've been dealing with most of the time shows up and says, haha, I betray you. And betrayed, the other dude and takes his power afterwards. The storyline also just gets awkward because, your final boss guy can just keep dying because he can just upload his consciousness to some other thing. And it just feels weird to keep beating him and having him still acting like he's just gonna, trounce you this time. I feel like they could have developed that a little bit better. Other things, there's just some cheesy asset reuse. You get a lot of like poses that are very similar. Now this is more a double A like game kind of problem, where you can kind of understand it. It's not like intentionally horrible, but it just kind of causes a problem. If you see all that lightning, that's those little lightning balls. That's from my healer just healing, what I was talking about before. But yeah, it just kind of feels a little lackluster. I think the story could have been a whole lot stronger if they had just taken a little more time. Maybe if they had focused on less twists and turns that just didn't pay off ultimately. Combat mechanics, I think that's middling too. So the dodge roll, I don't really tend to dodge a ton. I mean, once in a while I do, but it just feels not as useful as just getting off another attack or using like a special move. I'd rather just try to get more AP, or, it ends up rough. You end up in situations where most of the time you're like CCing the enemy by just juggling them with a sheer amount of attacks, or you're just sitting there healing like mad if you're using Nina, and you're just sitting on the enemy healing and dealing damage and keeping everything close together, and also being able to buff everyone while doing that. So I don't know, I feel like a lot of the mechanics go to waste, and then other ones like the AP just feel slapped on and feel like a bad choice. The bad. So quality of life, at first when this game released, thankfully they fixed it. Anytime a character would leave your party for, story reasons, which happened often, they would unequip everything. So they would take off their accessories and you have to spool through this gigantic list of gear. Big pain, not a problem anymore though, so I'm not going to dwell on it. They fixed that. But there are other quality of life issues like that. Skill points. You level up your characters. You get some characters when they're a higher level. And what they do is they leave the skill tree completely open to you, but you have to go through each thing. And it just gets really annoying to spend time just putting into each point, because, like, let me show you. You have to do this, do that, go through that animation. I'm mashing. Okay, now I can select the next one. Okay, mashing. Okay, now I can select the next one. Now, doing that all for a character as soon as you get them is just time-consuming and kind of annoying. So I did not like that as as somebody who values their time. It just felt kind of annoying. Artificial grind, I feel like they want you to make a broken experience set, which makes sense. Basically a set of gear with just experience up like mad, and then abuse some skills to just level up all your characters, because that's what I did just to get to max really quickly. Not the best setup. I'd rather the game just be paced out better rather than wanting me to mess around with that. It ends up not being a huge drain on your time, but it's just annoying. Like, I don't think that's how things should be designed. So I think that's kind of a mistake to do. But I get it. Some people like feeling like they're breaking the game. Whatever. Enemy difficulty. So right now, you can see that I'm kind of crushing a lot of the enemies I'm going into. Let me just walk into a fight. I'm not even really going to try to do too much. Oh, here's like a boss enemy, so this one actually might be a bit more of a problem. But what I can simply do is just kind of sit in the middle of the field and just not really do too much. I don't have to really worry because the gameplay is just not that exciting. You can see right now, like, I gotta keep an eye on all my characters here. I gotta make sure I keep dropping heals. I gotta wait for my AP to come back. There are little tricks I can do. For example, I can summon everyone in, give them a big heal, give them a bit of a buff. But, you run out of AP, it gets kind of boring, it gets kind of annoying. But the best way to play my healer is like this. I just kind of sit there and mash heals, I call people in when I see them getting even a slightly bit low because they can lose health pretty quickly. And then maybe I can take control of like one of my other characters for a little bit. Now I can actually pay because I got full AP. But, you know, sometimes my attacks just miss because enemy falls. Enemies CC'd, I can do a ton of damage now. You can kind of see it's not terribly interactive because I'm just kind of sitting here mashing and talking and not really having too much trouble. There's supposed to be all this dodging stuff involved with like that charge attack, but it gets kind of annoying to pull off because most enemies don't like really react to it unless you do it at specific times, particularly bosses. Normal enemies, you can just get it off all the time, no problem. So I feel like that mechanic gets kind of lost. And then other characters, it's kind of harder to play. You really gotta take control for it to really add up. Like, look how much damage I can do right now. And then I can also do this, go back here, and watch, it's gonna be crazy. Yep. She does more damage from the back. So you see, like, it makes a huge difference, because I know what I'm doing with her. It's easy to knock out an enemy, but when the AI is controlling her, she's not gonna take advantage of any of that. She's just gonna kind of putter around. But I want the healer to give people buffs and keep them alive. I want everyone to do different things, and it just feels like I'm fighting the system. So I feel like those combat mechanics altogether just end up being a little bit of a mess. I know that wasn't the most articulate way of putting it, because I'm trying to talk while actually playing it. But, you know, in summation, it's okay as a combat system. It's just that there's a lot of parts that feel like they're fighting against you. It feels like you really need to be in control to get everything done. And sometimes that works out, like the bosses are obviously not so hard that you can't do it. It's just that it doesn't feel fun. I just want to be able to focus on a character and trust the other ones to do something, or at least try to do something useful. And sometimes it's kind of hard to get that. And fighting against the AP system and doing cheesy things like swapping to Nina and charging to other characters to heal them, which is her special, is the most effective way I found of generating enough AP to then do useful things with my melee characters, which it's just not a fun way to have to play it. I just have a big problem with that. I think the incentives get weaker as you play too. Like the characters become less and less focused upon. The characters you might like matter less. The worlds just kind of get hand-waved aside. You know, there's political intrigue that matters on a local level at first, and then soon you're just blasting through space all over the place, and it's just kind of like, well, it's not the best. As far as locales go, there's a good amount of places to go, but I can't say I was ever like blown away by the variety. You know, unfortunately, it could have been, well, it could have been a lot better. Let me see if I can load up a save slot where I can showcase that a little bit, because since I already beat this thing. Okay, yeah, good. Here, I can leave this area. So there's this whole map that you see right now. These are all places you can go to in the fantasy world, but a lot of them are just kind of like big fields where you kind of run around, and then like a few little towns that really don't have a lot going on. Like, they look nice. It seems like, oh, well, you can fly. There's got to be a lot of interesting things, but mostly it's just like a few treasure chests in the air and then like some basic enemies in the field. Nothing too exciting and nothing too worthwhile. After the fantasy areas, there's like a few space areas. One of these is just like a city, basically. Like it's a transport, like it's a vessel, but it's not like, it's just a hub. That's all it is. Then there's another one that's like a little mini city that has like an event that happens in it where you fight through like, you know, some facility. There's a battleship you go to that's been infected with some, you know, crazy cyborg guys. And then, you know, there's another town, and it's okay, but they're pretty short. So, you know, overall, there's not like, it's not bad, but you do fly through some of these zones really quickly, and it feels like there could have been a little bit more done with them. Finally, I think two characters, you know, you can focus on either being Leticia or Raymond as a story thing. I don't really think it's worth it to divide the story up. They should have just shown us the cutscenes. It's so awkward when they kick you out of the perspective of one of the characters, and they're like, oh, you're Leticia, so you can't hear this conversation because Raymond's having it. And then, you know, your own conversations, your own special events are just kind of boring. Especially egregious when you were kidnapped as Leticia and you're just sitting there listening to an enemy monologue, and then you're just kind of like being told like, oh, you can wander the city a little bit and talk to people, but you're still under house arrest. And it was just a very unenjoyable section, because it just felt awkward, and it just felt like Leticia was made to be very stupid on purpose so she wouldn't be able to escape on her own, and she had to rely on Rey for some reason, even though her whole arc is about becoming more, willful and determined, and she could totally kick the enemy's ass by herself at that point. So at least, maybe that's because my build was strong, but still, it just feels awkward, and it doesn't feel like they really gave her as much of a focus, which is a shame because I think she's got a good character. But she dotes a bit too much on Rey, and I really feel like they wanted you to be Rey. And the endings are also just so... It's so weird how you do it. So basically, whoever you have the most, I'll just call it affection points for, that's whose ending you get. And that's accrued by talking to them at certain events and getting these, little mini, character story events where they'll chat about something, and they'll be like, oh, I can't believe you thought about this, or let's go do this thing, without actually showing it with any animations. But you have all these little events, and whoever you have the highest points with, that's whose ending you get. My problem is I watched all those. It feels like most of them should have just been shown as a sort of epilogue. They really should not be all like, oh, well, we want you to go back and play through to do this, because that feels so asinine to do. You can totally cheese it too. You can just reload a save and just pump up points by putting a bunch of stats into something. You can make an item that basically raises affection so that you can cheese it and just get everyone's like that. But it just feels so ridiculous, especially when some of them really don't counter others. That's more of an issue, though, with Rey's, where there's a few of them where it's like, oh, it looks like he's got a relationship with this girl character, or it looks like he kind of has one with this one. And, he can do that with most of the female characters, except for, except for the alchemist girl, because she's kind of young, and with Leticia, where they have more of a friendship. Although they always seem to be verging on trying to make it into a relationship. I'm really not sure, because even in Leticia's ending, it seems like she really likes being around him, although I always had the impression she just likes the adventure and, the world she can go to more than it's necessarily all about Rey. But I don't know. It's hard to say, because it could be either way, and I'm okay with the two main characters not getting together and all that. That's perfectly fine. I just feel like Leticia gets kind of snubbed on that, because she doesn't have such a focus on that with her endings. So it really feels like hers were more just an epilogue of oh, here's what this character's up to, here's how this one's feeling. It just feels odd to cut them out. For example, with Nina, on Leticia's ending, you kind of you let her work in this prestigious place in the city, and she's all excited and she's telling you about that, and that's it doesn't seem big enough to warrant oh, you beat the game with this person in mind, and here's the reward, something you totally expected them to do. I just felt that was kind of half-hearted. Overall, I don't think the game looks bad, but it certainly doesn't look great. There's definitely pop-in that shouldn't be there. There's definitely things that just feel kind of janky, but again, it does feel like a AA game. I think the price should have been maybe a little bit lower, considering that. It's okay. And I think I'll end my review there. It's enjoyable. If you really love RPGs, it can be worth the time. There are cool characters here. They all have different abilities. They're fun to control. But I think you could do better with your time. There's not enough novelty here to really warrant it. I feel like, when I'm looking back, when I'm on my deathbed, and I'm thinking, oh man, what great RPGs did I play? I don't think this one's going to come to mind as one that, really blew my mind. It's okay. It's okay. That's it. Alright, ending it there.